restaurant review in. All right.
There
Welcome
you
to
go.
the show, Rachel.
Thank you. It's nice to be on this side. I like this.
You
I
like
like this.
this? You like,
I'm usually producing. I'm not usually like the guest. So I hope I don't screw up. Let's just see how
of
it goes.
course not. Oh my God. Well, and you know what? I am so interested. I am fascinated by production. I, I,
Yeah,
I obviously don't work in production myself, but I find it fascinating. So you have a lot to share that I think our audience is going to be super interested in. So
the good, the
for
bad, and the
those,
ugly. Sure.
yes. Well,
It's true.
let's talk a little bit about how you started in your career because you spent
Okay.
most of your career in entertainment business. Tell us how you started.
All right. I'm going to make a very long story short because I know a lot of mothers a lot of women out there that are watching are also mothers. How does my kid get a job? Da, 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 da. This is the first thing. You have to know somebody to get in, but you have to know something to stay in. I got very lucky. When I was growing
Mm.
up, my best friend's father, Rick Dewar, was an Academy Award winning re-recording mixer. He and my now boyfriend Scott won an Academy Award, that team, for Apollo 13. I always knew
Wow.
I would be in entertainment, but Rick mentored me very early on, and I caught a very early break. My cousin lived on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, and she walked her dog, and she happened to walk the dog right by King World. King World is where Inside Edition was being shot, and the talk show Rolanda. And I remember, I know you've interviewed Amy Rosenblum, and I tried to, I bullshitted my way into an interview with Amy, but the cousin ended up walking the dog and she didn't need the money. She's walking the dog, and they offered her a job answering phones at King World. And I needed an internship. So my cousin got me an internship, and I barely graduated college. I went right to New York with no money, nothing. I went and I started the internship, and I got hired like a week later at the talk show Rolanda, and I'm still talking to Rolanda to this day. So yeah,
Mm.
you really do need to know somebody to get in, but you better know something to stay in. And honestly, and if your kid, it's funny, I had a cousin who reached out to me for my contact information so her son could reach out to me for a job. And I said, listen to me, Amy. I go, her name is Amy. I'm like, Amy, if he can't even reach out on his own, I go, no, he can't work for me. Like, that's ridiculous.
Mhm.
You're going to
Right.
get a Syracuse, like the best communication school in the world. Like, let your kid do their own work. So I said,
Yeah.
unless he reaches out, I said no. And I never heard from him.
Well, that's a
Mm-mm.
missed opportunity. So,
I know. Well, probably not. I have a feeling.
well, for him,
Probably.
missed
Yes.
opportunity for him.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. But you got to learn the hard way sometimes.
for sure. Well, okay, so let's talk about then. So you started at Rolanda, and then you worked at a number of different shows, including
Yes.
the CBS
Okay.
Morning Show.
I did. Yeah, I went from Rolanda to the People's Court with Ed Koch. So, like, the former mayor of New York. I
Wait,
used
wait,
to have
wait.
to sit and have
Ed
lunch with
Koch
him.
was on the People's Court.
He was the judge on the People's Court, like, before Judge Jerry. He was the original judge after Judge Wapner when they resurrected the show.
I
So
had
my
no
boss from
idea.
Rolanda, my bosses at Rolanda were a married couple, Cindy Wolfman and David Scott. And when we left Rolanda, Cindy, who was like one of the best producers ever, went and stayed home and had kids. And David launched the People's Court. He brought me with him. He's like, go have lunch with the mayor. I'm like, all right. And like, he was a rock star, Mayor Koch, like, just,
He sure was.
so it was fun. So I did that for, I think, like 2 years. And then Oprah started Oxygen. Oprah started this cable network. It was Oprah and Marcy Carsey and Tom Werner and Karen Vanderback. Like, A Different World was my favorite show growing up. And I feel like I went to
Mhm.
Oprah University. So I took a shot, I took an interview, and I got my first producer title there. And I was there, and they said, and Ronnie Selig, another, person who I still talk to, said, that's Gail King, go say hi. You're going to be her producer. And I was like, all right. So yeah, that's how Gail and I met. So Ronnie was responsible for that. I produced a half-hour weekly show for Gail within this other show called Pure Oxygen. And when Oxygen was ending, I mean, there were tons. I mean, it was ending, and we did a special with like Beyonce, On the Road with Destiny's Child, with my friend LaShawn Browning, who was one of the most. I mean, I look back now at people I started with, and everybody's like,
Yeah.
so Gail and I left Oxygen at the same time. She went to O Magazine. That's when it was launching. And I
Mhm.
went to The View. I did
Mhm.
8 seasons at The View. I started when Elizabeth started, and I left right after Audrey Jones produced Barack Obama because, I got a phone call and it was from Gail, and she said, "How would you like to be?" And when the my executive producer was leaving, but I have the show on OWN, and I'm like, let me think for a second. Gail King, OWN, the Gail King show at OWN. I'm in. I live for Gail. She's taught me some of the greatest shit ever. So yeah, we did the show at OWN, and then she came in and she goes, "You want to go to lunch?" And I was like, "All right." Guess who called? And I'm like, who? CBS this morning was the CBS morning show. They called it the early show. They were resurrecting, rebuilding, and Chris Licht, who's like this phenomenal manager. He now is the EP showrunner of the late night, with Stephen Colbert. And he's just like, he was at Morning Joe. So he was going to resurrect this morning show. And Gail said, "You're never going to believe who they're going to pair me with." And I'm like, oh my God, it took forever. Gail and I, you go out to eat. She's the best person to go out to eat with. She orders everything, and if she picks off the plate and blah blah blah. Long story short, by the end of lunch, she's like, "They want to meet with you," and I'm like, "Me? I don't know anything about news." I was like, "I don't want to go to news," but I was so excited for her because she's a news junkie. I'm just a people junkie.
Yep.
I had the meeting with Chris. I went in jeans. I'm more dressed up right now for this. I was going to CVS. I went to his office. I had on a ponytail. I had no makeup on. I had on jeans. I to this day, wedges. I remember what I was wearing. And I sat there, and I was telling him everything he should know about Gail, because she's the easiest, greatest person to work with, the smartest. She's a brilliant producer. And I said, all right, bye, nice to meet you. He goes, no. He goes, "Where are you going?" He goes, and he literally said, he goes, "I want you to have a front row seat." And I'm like, "I don't want one." I'm like, "What do you mean?" And I'm like, "This is news. It's like learning another language." He said, women, the 8 o'clock, what people like to watch on TV. And we had some lunching and whatever. And they sent somebody who went to Princeton, Sharon Hoffman, to come talk to me. And this other guy, Ryan Cadro, who had a late night background. And the two of them convinced me to come over. I went to CBS, and look, I worked very hard, but news was not my thing. I didn't even finish out the 2-year contract. I remember having a meeting with Chris, and I loved everyone, and I learned how to grow in the space and do stuff. But it wasn't my thing. So, they were like, "We're not renewing your contract." And I was like, "Thank God." And I switched. Wow. So I learned a lot of lessons in that time. I had to regroup, Mm-hmm. So when I left CBS, I regrouped, and I went to every doctor possible to get healthy. I tried to figure out what I wanted to do, what I didn't want to do. I ended up making a couple of choices for the money, which is never the reason to take a job. I learned that. Mm-hmm. I went to LA to do a couple of pilots, and it's just bad. It wasn't the right thing. So, whatever. I came back. I started this company for myself called Appropriately Selfish, where I basically applied everything I know about producing talent on TV to people who are not on air. I was introduced. I actually, what I did? It's funny. I just remember this. I needed help. I was misdirected. I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. What am I going to do with myself? Producers, it's not like you go to school and get a certificate saying you're hereby certified to practice producing. It's not like medicine or law or doing nails or doing anything. It's just, so they basically, I met with this woman, Vernay. She was a keynote speaker. I've only worked for black women pretty much my entire career, except for Bill Getty. Every job I've ever had, from Marilyn Gill till Gail, to always work for black women. So Vernay, we met, and she thought I was really unusual. She thought I understood a lot of the nuances and stuff. And anyway, I got hired, and my job was to raise Vernay's profile. Well, I did my job maybe too well. Vernay was already she was freaking amazing. She was the #1 keynote speaker about diversity and inclusion. Now it's DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And Netflix decided, they fell in love with her like everybody else. So Vernay, they created the position, vice president, inclusion strategy. It's a global position. She's still there to this day. When I met her for the first time, I felt like my father and Gail were on either side of her when she walked into the room. There was something about her that was so magnetic, and she was so confident. Barnard, grew up in Baltimore. When I went to school there, Barnard educated, Harvard law trained, called herself a recovering lawyer. I loved everything about her. It was so unexpected, the meeting, but it filled me up, and we worked together for 1.5 years. I traveled all over with her to these incredible places. And I was mining my own content, along the way, learning. And so so it was incredible. I was like learning all these things from Vernay and everything. And when she got that job at Netflix, I was so psyched. But I'm like, oh my God, I don't have a job again. So I had been doing some consulting work for iHeartRadio.
Mhm.
There was this guy there, Dr. Dave Colin, who produces, like, his company at iHeart produces all this content for the morning shows across the country. And he wanted me to meet this woman. And I walk in, and Spruce Henry's there, and he's like, the producer. I walk in, and there's this woman there, Tracey Moore. And she goes, Rachel. And I'm like, Tracey. And we were like, oh my God. It turns out, like, I had cast her on the show with Gail for like this parenting panel like years before. And
Wow.
Tracy and I got together, and with Dave's backing, and we started creating what is now called Inside the Black Box. And I mean, that's a whole other story, but that's kind of
Yeah.
like, it's not an easy road. It's a
Yeah.
whole thing.
Well, let's talk a little bit first about some of the stops you made, and then we'll get to
Okay.
Inside the Black Box. So
Okay.
the shows are quite different. Some of the shows that you have worked on are different,
Yes.
right? The View, to
Quite.
me, as an example, you said you spent 7 or so years at
Eight
the View,
seasons. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
which is a long time.
Mm-hmm.
To me, when I think about a show like that, it is about current events, like what's happening, right? Because that's the fodder for the conversation, right?
But back then, yeah, so that's the top of the show. But back then, we also did the best shit to get. Sorry, I cursed a lot. I'm sorry.
No, sorry.
But yes, that was, back then. Although, yes, they did Hot Topics. They always did a celebrity interview. And then there was always, segment 5, which was like, Best Buys at the drugstore for under $10. Or like, my favorite dermatologist, Dr. Day, like doing the latest, lunchtime, plastic surgery. Like, yeah. But today, yes. Even then it was, events driven. But yes, now it's
Very
much
much.
more,
So,
yeah.
so when you think about the pace of, because
Hmm.
I want to make sure that we get across a little bit what it's like to work as a producer on some of these shows, and
Yeah,
what that pace is like, and the
I will tell you. Yeah.
personalities. Can you talk a little
Yes,
bit about
yes,
people can navigate that?
yes. Okay. So The View, let's go back to The View. Producers said, it's a juggling act. And the best show at The View is always the show backstage, behind the scenes. And it was so much fun. And Bill Getty, when he ran that show, everybody knew why they were there. It's like the opportunities that you were going to get based on that. And he really ran it really tight. Like, everybody knew what their job was there. But my job was to make sure the hosts are taken care of and prepared. Bill's good. My supervising the producer at the time, this girl like Dusty Alexandra Cohen, brilliant. She good. Juggling. So I think, when you're a producer, the best way to prepare to be a producer is to go wait on tables. Wait on tables. Because it's like it's customer service being a producer. You're handling. I didn't even mention the guests. Oh my God! And in the middle of all this, there are celebrity guests and regular people who come on to share their story. So it's like waiting on tables and multiple tables at a time, and being able to get through to the ends of the meal and to make it delicious. But what's funny about it is, when you're a producer, you go in with a script, with a plan. Um, but I always say, I'm a producer, I'm not a puppeteer. I'll give you the stuff, you make it your own. And that's why The View was so great, because they all just did them. It's
Yeah.
like it was a great job. Working in news, very different. A show like The
Right.
View at the time, we could sit at the back table and have long lunches, and it was such a great job. It was the best. And I'll forever love that. When I got to CBS, though, a car showed up in my driveway at 3:15 in the morning, and I didn't get home until
Mm.
quite late at night. And I had 2 phones that were always going off. And I don't call that a job. It was a lifestyle. I
Mhm.
think news, by the time I got to news, I was like 38. With The View, that's where I got engaged, got married, had a baby, where my mother had bone marrow, like surgery. Like, everybody we all grew up together there. In news, it's freaking news. Like, you have to be factually correct. It's
Yeah.
not like The View, where you could just be like, eat this bagel. They sell it for $5,000 at the Venetian.
Right.
It's like, this is news.
Right.
And
Well,
it
and
was
it's
a
also
different animal.
hard. It's hard to just thinking about those two different types of shows, right? The
Hmm.
View, and then especially when you were talking about when you were on the show, when it wasn't maybe
Hmm.
as entrenched in current events, you
No, it
can
was
plan a little.
hardcore.
right. But you can plan a little bit more, right?
A little bit.
With
Yeah.
news, it's whatever is happening, and you need to
It's news.
constant, right, right. And
But
that
this
is
is the thing though. I think what I could tell your people, like this is what matters, right? You have to know your strengths and your weaknesses. There was no way Chris Licht, who's putting together this massive show at CBS this morning, was letting me anywhere near what we call the A block, the 7 to 7:30. That's like the major news at the time. Like that's how they did it. The show is a new EP and everything now, but I wasn't going near that. I was going to be at the 8 o'clock, where I thought it would be like 8 o'clock at every other morning show. I thought I'd be doing like pumps for fall or raincoats or makeup trends. But at 8:15, we were still in Syria. And that's when I was like, oh my God, can I do like the Real Housewives of Syria? Can I do like, can we do Downton Abbey? Like, you have to know your strengths and your weaknesses. At The View, look, you had to audition for a job at The View. They didn't just hire you. You had to like try out and then they would
right.
hire you. At CBS, I felt like I was just hanging on for dear life. It's very different. And then, all these projects, it's very good to like get around, and I'm grateful that I did the things that I was great at and the things I was terrible at. But even when like a show like News where I wasn't cut out for it, I did find a way to contribute. And like, I taught younger women on the staff, younger kids on the staff, how to be heard, how to use their voice, so I did contribute a lot.
Right.
You got to love the people you're working with. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit. You mentioned the guests that you've probably encountered on a bunch of the different shows. Can you share with us one crazy guest story that you feel comfortable sharing? That
just one?
Okay. Well, just we're happy to hear more than one, but why don't you pick your favorite?
The first one that comes to mind when you say crazy guest story, because it was so funny. Courtney Love was amazing. She was like, she's just this loving, like mushy, like just vulnerable person. And, it's not uncommon to be in the room and they're changing and everybody's like naked and whatever, you're fine. Well, Courtney like left the room naked. And like Courtney was like topless until Courtney like pretty much almost got on the set. So it was like 30 seconds for walking. I'm like, you need to put something. I was like,
wait, this was on The View? This was on The View.
Chasing her around. I was chasing her around the upstairs hallway, like naked. And I'm like, not me naked, Courtney, like this. And she rode out on a broomstick. Like it was hilarious. So she was amazing and funny and like fantastic. I remember like Steve Martin was on like to play his banjo, and he threw everybody else out of the room when he was briefing and he started playing the banjo. But I had always had a crush on Steve Martin growing up. I was dying. I was like, oh my God, so that was cool. And then the greatest moment, because I'm from New Jersey and I worship Bruce Springsteen, always have, always will. Patti Scalfa was coming on because she had her own album. And everybody knew how much I love Bruce and LL Cool J. I know there's a dichotomy there, but we'll go to Bruce. All right. So I go upstairs to brief Patti and I walk in and Bruce is sitting there and nobody told me. So I thought very fast because it's about Patti, Yeah. And I said,
Patti, for those who don't know, is his wife.
Oh no, Patti Scalfa. I mean, East Street Band. They're married, but she's Patti Scalfa. Yeah. So wait. So I walk in the room and I go, "Hi, Mr. Scalfa. Nice to meet you." I said, "But today's about her." He jumps up. He gives me like the biggest hug. He was amazing. He went upstairs. He checked the acoustics, the audio, and everything. And I hung out and I briefed with Patti. And it was one of those moments where I was like, "Oh my God, like I could lose my shit right now and like freak because like Bruce is right here." Or, so I went the cool way and I did it and I maintained myself.
Well, let's shift to Inside the Black Box, your latest. Okay. And I know I've read about the show. I've not seen the show yet. It's coming out soon. By the time this airs, the show might be just out. But can you talk a little bit about what the show is and what topics you're covering?
All right. So this show came about. Okay. There's no such thing as like an overnight thing. You don't just like sell a show. When that happens, it's bullshit because it doesn't happen. So I told this story about Tracey Moore. Tracey and I started developing the show 7 years ago. It was right when hashtag Oscars So White was happening. The show is about being Black in entertainment. And, again, because I've only worked for, Black women in power, I had this very unusual perspective that most people didn't. Tracey was married to a Jewish guy. My brother had married a Black woman. Like we had like these very symbiotic things. So Tracey is a celebrity acting coach and she's a casting director. And she was known before transitioning some of the biggest rappers to being actors. So from Busta Rhymes back then to Cardi B on the set of Hustlers, she just did Eve, Notori Norton, like Brandy, like Tracy's hardcore. She's no joke, and people in the industry like live for her. So I'm excited for her to get her moment in the sun now with this show. So Tracey had these acting classes, and in the acting classes, she's called the spirited actor. She would like teach these kids, about acting and about life. Like, so she's so full of heart and stuff. But what the point of what we were doing was, how are we going to convey what it's like being Black, in Hollywood, and make people care about it? So we sat around and we had a lot of breakfast, a lot of conversations and this and that. And we decided that this was going to be a space of truth. And, remember, I'd worked for Vernay and, diversity and inclusion, when the show was already in development. So I know all the proper terms. White people say stuff like, diversity and inclusion and African-American and this and that. Black people don't talk like that amongst themselves. And they have unique experiences that I'm never going to know. So we wanted to make the show this place where people felt comfortable telling the truth. And, and it also became a platform for young actors to show off their stuff. So basically what it developed into was Inside the Black Box. So with Dave Colin behind us at iHeart. And if it weren't for Dave, he financed the entire pilot. He let us do our thing. And it took 7 years to 6 years to find a home in Crackle. But listen, this is, Dave Colin knew this guy, Bob Moore. He is, they knew each other from MTV back in the day. Like Bob ran like the Tom Green show, or maybe he was a producer. And Bob knew a guy called Scott Weinstock. And Scott Weinstock was, went to college and was friends with, David Ozer, who's the, oh my God, I want to get his title right. But the big muckety muck at Landmark for Crackle. And they ended up finding the show a home. Listen, this was after a lot of, hits and fails, but what you'll see on the show, all right, so this is the thing, when George Floyd was killed, they said, a lot of white people woke up for the first time. This is stuff that has been going on in Hollywood, in the industry, people like lack of representation, and our actors, so these actors make up the audience, these like aspiring actors, directors, producers, but celebrity guests come in. So like Felicia Rashad came and did a taping, and we gave one of the young actors an opportunity to read for Felicia Rashad, and she made Felicia Rashad cry. You hear stories about, the racism, like Tracey, will tell you all about it, but you hear stories about like working in rooms where you're the only Black person, and white people saying, can you make this person sound more urban, more ghetto, more this? I mean, my face was like, I learned so much between Vernay, Tracey, and the show would not have happened. The show was called Inside the Black Box with Joe Morton and Tracey Moore. Joe Morton, I mean, Papa Pope, Joe Morton, our kind of people. Joe Morton, remember I said, I said growing up that A Different World was my favorite. And, he was with Whitley before Joyne and Whitley were a thing. So Joe Morton.
Well, in Scandal,
Scandal. But listen, this is the thing. I've been a fan of Joe Moore forever. When you're selling a show, you need to present a sizzle or a pilot or whatever. So Dave Colin literally financed this pilot, literally financed it. Didn't ask Tracey and I for anything. Tracey and me, I'm nuts about that. So he didn't ask Tracey or me for any money, just our talent. We put it together. Tracey got on the phone and she, we were trying to book guests, and Tracey knows everybody and nobody does a pilot, but Tracey got people to say yes. That it was crazy. So her friend is Hopi Morton, and Hopi Morton's father is Joe Morton. So Joe came and did the pilot, and one of the young actors in the audience literally did a cold read of a Papa Pope monologue. Like, could you imagine for Joe Morton, a woman got up and she did a cold read of a Papa Pope monologue from Scandal. And I'm sorry, Joe Morton's one of those voices and one of these forces and one of these, he's got the sexy, he's got the direct, he's got the this, he's got the, this girl gets up and reads, and Joe gets out of his chair, goes into the audience and sits to watch her, and then gave all this feedback. So after the show, he said he wanted to be a part of the show. He wanted to come on as an EP. We flew out to Los Angeles. Tracey, Dave, sorry, my grammar. We flew out to LA. We went to Fig and Olive. We met him there, and we're sitting at a table, and we can't believe our little show that could Joe Morton, who's the pilot, is talking about actually coming on board. These fans are looking over, like looking at Joe. It was so funny. So anyway, he agreed to not only come on as a co-EP, as an EP rather, but as a host with Tracey. So Tracey brings this perspective of being a celebrity acting coach and a casting director to the table. And Joe is an actor who has been in the game for a long time, and they both tell their truths. But because it's such a beautiful, safe environment, everybody tells their truth. So I heard some stories that like made me very, very sick, very upset. But, you know, like now, my shock and awe, like I just want people to hear these stories because, you know, people hear about inequality and equity, but they don't know what it is because nobody's felt safe enough to really tell the truth before. So from Oscar So White, you know, 7 years ago, you know, today they're, you know, look, Vernay is at Netflix. Like a lot of things have changed. There is more representation, but there's a long way to go. And within the Black community, you know, there's all these different sections. Like Joe says something like, are all because, you know, we have the same complexion. It doesn't mean we've had the same experience. Like it's very eye-opening, you know, like Tracey at one point said something like, I said, Tracey, you don't have to say African-American. You could just say Black. And she's like, look, I have been called the N-word. I've been called colored. I have been called this, that. She's like, and it was one of the most poignant things she's ever said to me because, you know, at her level of experience and all this, you know, identifying, you know, like the world is changing, but the world has a lot more change to go. So Inside the Black Box gives you a ton of entertainment. It's very fun and funny, and the actors get involved, and there's like, you know, a lot of spontaneity and like acting exercises that are kind of like, you know, James Corden has carpool karaoke. Well, we have stuff that'll definitely be viral. We do this one thing called Going Blackwards, where you take a historically white show and you recast it with Black actors. And I think people are going to fall in love with it. We start every show going Inside the Black Box, where they pull out a prop and have to do a scene and improv around. Look, I'm very proud of the show. The fact that it's even premiering and people can watch it now, like people can watch it now on Crackle. And like, if you don't know how to get Crackle, can I tell people how to get Crackle? Because that's the hardest part.
Please, please.
All right, guys. So Crackle is a streaming service like Netflix, but it's free. So all you have to do is go online and Google Crackle. You could download it on your computer, on your phone. If you have a smart TV, which I have them and I didn't even know that's what I had. And you just download Crackle for free and you can watch Inside the Black Box and a lot of other good things. It's just for anything.
I love it. I love it. You know? What wonderful lessons. All right. Well, what is next for you?
This is what's funny. So the other day, Kerry Washington, you know, Tracey and Joe both had this relationship with Kerry Washington, and Kerry Washington tweeted and Instagrammed and DM'd Tracey about Inside the Black Box. Kerry freaking Olivia Pope, you know, like Olivia Pope, but you know, everything she does is amazing. I mean, and Tracey, I've known her since like, you know, back in the day. Anyway, okay, so in the same day that like Kerry Washington is like tweeting and posting about my show, I'm literally posting my resume to like get a job. And then like I'm toasting this, and then in the same day my kid got into this program, and then my dog peed on my bed, and I'm sitting here like cleaning up the freaking dog behind the bed. So on one hand,
that's life.
That's it, guys, and you got to roll with it. It's like, you know, I've learned a lot of patience. The pandemic taught me patience. Good things take time. Timing is everything, and everything I learned from Gail, I roll it all together. And Vernay, and I don't know what's next is the answer. And you know, it's all right. It's okay. It's okay. It's like, it's okay not to know what's next. It's okay to decide to like turn the corner. But if you need something, you have to tell people, because people would assume that like I'm rolling in the dough and you have this, you have that, whatever. I have to get on it. I'm divorced. No alimony, no child support. Like, you know, it's like, I have to stay on it. So you have to keep the hustle. You know, you got to keep it moving.